Hello, I'm Corinna Harrod and this is the Monday Night Review. Hello and welcome to episode 134 of the Monday Night Review. I have I've just been so researching this episode that I've got myself into a panic that I'm going to miss out some information or it's going to be in the wrong order, that's going to be confusing for you. And we know perfection is the thief of progress. So I'm just going to get on with it. There is quite a few TV shows about this. So if you want to find out more, then go and find out more. Part of the reason, I feel like I've said this a lot recently, but I am not a researcher by trade. I love doing internet research and reading, but part of the reason why I like doing this podcast is that maybe you will hear about something that you haven't heard about before that you can then go and read up on or find out more about if that's the sort of thing that interests you. I cannot give the full information because this is a hobby. So this is going to be a long episode. It's also really dark. So this is your trigger warning. This is about missing and murdered women. There are bits where we talk about rape and sexual assault. Nothing too graphic, but I just wanted to give you a heads up at the beginning that this is a tough one, but it is also going to be long. So you're going to need to make yourself a cuppa, get a drink, get ready for your dog walk. Start this at the beginning of a long drive or train journey, because there's a lot going on. So, as I said before, there are a few TV series on this. There's stuff on YouTube. And part of the problem I had with researching this was that there are so many women. Once you peel back the layers, there are just more and more women that can be added to the list of missing or murdered. So it was just becoming so long that I thought I would have to then pare it back to the main ones associated with this case. I just don't want anyone to be left out, but rather than it just being a list of every woman that's murdered and missing in Ireland, we today are focusing on Ireland's Vanishing Triangle. It's really complicated. I'm going to upload a map on social media so you can see the places I'm talking about with the traditional, for want of a better word, 6 cases that are associated with this Vanishing Triangle. I'd also like to do a big shout out to my friend Marie, who helped me with my pronunciation on this episode. There's a lot of Irish names. On the 12th of January 2022, Aisling Murphy left her work at a school in Durrow and drove to the Dangeen Road car park in Dublin. She parked her car and got out to walk along the canal. At 3:21 p.m, Aisling Murphy's activity tracker began recording erratic fluctuations consistent with a violent attack. It then recorded her heart rate rapidly decreasing until 3:27 p.m. and then ceased recording a heartbeat at 3:31 p.m. It's believed her attacker overpowered her, dragging her off the towpath into an adjacent steep ditch where he stabbed her repeatedly in the neck with a serrated knife. The murder of Aisling Murphy was incredibly recent and it horrified everyone. It was mid-afternoon. It was just such a shocking thing to happen, and it was just, for a lot of us, it was just a case of the danger of just being female. But it's not her murder that we're talking about today. Aisling was murdered on Fiona's Way, a walkway in Tullamore that has become a popular spot for joggers and was opened and dedicated to Fiona Pender in 2017 with a memorial designed by her brother John. Fiona Pender was just one of the women whose disappearance are part of what's become known as Ireland's Vanishing Triangle. These cases cover multiple counties in Ireland, as far north as Dublin, as far south as Wexford, and as far west as Laois and Offaly. The small tri-county area of Dublin, Kildare and Wicklow are a particular hotspot, with the Dublin-Wicklow Mountains playing a really major role in this. The number of cases seems to vary depending on where you look. Based on the areas where these women were last seen and the circumstances surrounding their disappearance, there seem to be at least 13 cases with strong enough links to be counted as part of this mysterious vanishing triangle. There is even a special task force that's been set up by the police, Operation Trace, and they have really focused on 6 cases that they believe to be connected. Operation Trace, which stands for Tracing, Reviewing and Collating Evidence, was set up by Commissioner Pat Byrne to review the files of Fiona Sinnott, Josephine Dullard, Deirdre Jacob, Cara Breen, Fiona Pender, who we talked about earlier, and Annie McCarrick. These women were deemed attractive and in the same age group. So for all the disappearing women, these ones were kind of deemed to be similar, though Detective Sergeant Alan Bailey described it as looking for 10 needles in 10 separate haystacks. He said that they didn't want to panic people at the time, but, quote, it was clear that could be looking for a serial killer. So today I'm going to talk about these women, but also some of the others that could be linked. I was going to do it in order of which they disappeared, but I'm going to focus first on the 6 that journalist Geraldine Niland has worked on. And she's made finding these women her life's work. She calls them my girls, and feels that these disappearances were deemed acceptable because of their lifestyles. Few of them are single mothers, they're quite young, or they had boyfriends, and in some places Ireland can be quite conservative about that, and so it was just seen that these girls were living a lifestyle that made them more susceptible to danger, and perhaps they weren't looked into in the same way. So Geraldine really looks for connections. She also has a real empathy for the families involved. She herself lost her brother in a warehouse accident when she was 11 and he was 10. Her parents worked in a warehouse. Her brother went into the warehouse with them one day, and somebody put him in the freight elevator, I believe the freight lift, and he was accidentally decapitated. I believe that's what happened. And so this is obviously very traumatic. She says in an interview that I watched where she says, he went to the warehouse, he didn't come home. But she knows where he is, and she feels this trauma from losing her brother, but she feels that at least she knows where he is. Whereas some of these families, they just don't know where their loved ones are. And it's Geraldine who came up with the term, the vanishing triangle. She understands that by giving it a name like this, it gives power to the collective. It's going to intrigue people and draw their attention to it than just these random disappearing women. Especially as we know from anyone who's into true crime, for younger people who disappear, quite often it seemed, they ran off or they ran away. Or the women are all of a similar age, as I said before. They're all deemed attractive, and they all had no reason to disappear. Now, for lots of reasons, we hear this, but in terms of their future planning, there is certain elements that mean that there's just no chance that they were thinking, I'm going to go. So, for example, Annie had invited friends to dinner the next night and was really excited about having a dinner party. And Cara had recorded her show. She'd set up her favourite show to record and had written the name of the show on it and Cara's tape, do not record over, and that kind of thing. So it was just sort of, there was no reason for them to disappear. So we're going to start up with the 6 that make up Neelan's vanishing triangle, and then we'll see how we go. So the first is Annie Bridget McCarrick. Now, she's a 26-year-old She's actually from Long Island, New York, and she just had a love affair with Ireland, and she'd visited numerous times. And then finally, in January of 1993, she had moved over to live. Now, the last confirmed sighting of Annie was captured on CCTV shortly before 11 o'clock on the 26th of March at the AIB Bank on Sandy Mount Road, close to where she lived. And she'd been working as a waitress at the Courtyard restaurant in Donnybrook and as a waitress at Cafe Java on Leeson Street. Now, she knew Ireland, but as I said, she'd only just arrived 6 weeks or so before to live permanently in Ireland. Now, there were sightings of her, but obviously as well, this is 93, this is before smartphones, camera phones. So a lot of these cases, that it's reliant on, is this actually the person or is it someone who looks like the person? So Annie goes shopping and then we don't really know. She's boarded the number 44 bus bound for Enniskerry in County Wicklow, and there were a number of further sightings in Enniskerry village and at Johnny Fox's pub. Now, what's interesting is Johnny Fox's pub seems to be quite a central place for all of this to take place. Her mother was due to arrive for a visit the following week, and when Annie is reported as missing, her family is contacted and her mother flies over immediately. And she says in an interview, the police didn't really take me seriously until a few days later when the men arrived, and that's Annie's father, and perhaps we don't know who the other male relative is. But the police are very relaxed. I mean, she is 26, so she's an adult, but they say, she's going to come back. She's going to return. But it's clear to her friends and family that something terrible has happened. The groceries that she just bought were left in their bags in the hallway of her flat, which was not only out of character, but weird. Even if you're going to run off, I don't really think you think, I'll go and buy loads of food, invite people for dinner, and then off I go. She was seen in Enniskerry, and people said, she obviously went for a walk in these mountains. Her friend said, she liked walking. She was fine walking, but not 7 kilometres uphill on her own on a dreary night in March. That was out of character. Leaving the groceries unpacked in the hallway was out of character. And this is a thing that we're coming up against over and over again when you talk about disappearing women or children or anything. It's not only what is the likelihood that a 26-year-old starting her new life in Ireland, where she is somewhere she's passionate about, is then going to run away. And essentially, that's what she's done, really. She's followed her dream. Where is she going to run away to? But also, those things that her friends and family, your friends and family know what is and isn't out of character for you. And it's frustrating, even now, talking about it. It must have been incredibly frustrating for her friends and family at the time. Now, she was seen with a man in the Johnny Fox pub. The man never came forward. He wasn't recognised. The man didn't come forward to be ruled out, which I think is very interesting. I think, therefore, we can assume that this man had something to do with her disappearance, though, as one person pointed out, why risk being identified by someone by going out with an intended victim? But this man has not said, and it was in all the papers. There was a lot of publicity about this. Now, the family hire a private investigator called Brian McCarthy, who makes loads of inquiries. He is Irish. And so, he knows people, he knows the locations. He doesn't get anywhere. And he's interviewed on the TV show that I watched. And he was like, it's very unusual to not get anywhere. And so that was interesting. They also had, because she was American, FBI agent Kenneth Strange. And he believes, when he looks at this case and the others that we're going to mention, he can see a link. He thinks that there is someone out there surveilling his victims and waiting for the perfect moment. In March 2023, Annie McCarrick's case is reclassified as a murder inquiry. At a press briefing, Detective Superintendent Eddie Carroll says the Gardaí are, quote, satisfied that it is more likely now that Annie came to a foul demise. So that is 1993. The next case is Josephine Dullard, who's known as Jojo. She's 21. She's of Callan, County Kilkenny, and she was living at Harold's Cross, Dublin, when she went missing on the 9th of November 1995. Now, at the time when she disappeared, she was making her way from Dublin back home to Callan, a route that she would have done numerous times. And this, again, 95, no, not many people had mobile phones. And you would get a lift with a friend, or you would call a friend from the phone box to ask for a lift. And that is what she does. She makes a phone call from the phone box. She's seen by someone driving past in the phone box in Moon in County Kildare. She is on the phone to this friend saying, can you give me a lift, or can someone come and give me a lift? She then puts down the receiver because she says, oh, there's a car coming. She puts down the receiver and then she comes back and says to her friend, oh, don't worry about it, I've got a lift. She's not seen again. A short time later, a woman answering Jojo's description, but obviously not 100% concerned, was seen leaning in the back door of a dark-coloured Toyota Carina type car. Again, this car has never been traced. Appeals for the driver to come forward have not been responded to, so they can't rule that out. Jojo was due to arrive at work in a pub, and she was always on time. She's very good. She was very responsible. So the landlord calls her family to see why she hasn't turned up, to see if she's ill, and her family become concerned. They call the police. The police say they have to leave it a certain amount of hours before they will start a missing persons inquiry. And in fact, they let it go over the weekend. They don't act until Monday morning on this. And her friends and family have already started searching because they know that this is wrong. That she was planning on coming home. She was on the phone to a friend saying that she wanted a lift home. And so why would they think, oh, but then she got in a car with a stranger and decided, no, I'm off to a new life without telling anyone. So they knew, they were worried. They started searching immediately. And she's never been found. Then, just over 6 months later, Fiona Pender, 25, of Tullamore, went missing on the 23rd of August 1996. Now, Fiona was born in 1971. She grew up in Offaly. She had 4 brothers. She trained to be a hairdresser. She's fun. She's kind. Everyone adored her. She was very popular. And when she disappeared, she was pregnant with her first child, and she was thrilled. She was so looking forward to being a mother. And she just vanishes. And this is very concerning. But again, nothing is really found. No real witness statements come forward. It's very confusing. 1997, Fiona's boyfriend John Thompson was arrested along with his sister and father, and they were questioned about Fiona's disappearance. Now, John says he saw Fiona at 6 o'clock on the morning of the 23rd of August in the flat that they shared in And in Tullamore, he left to go for work. Now, some have described John as a sexually violent man, and he may be linked to a 2015 Canadian case in which a man we believe to be John Thompson allegedly was accused but not found guilty of sexually assaulting his wife. And in the trial, the unnamed man's wife claims her husband confessed to murdering his ex-girlfriend back in Ireland. And it has been presumed that this is Fiona. But there is no way they can link it. So in 2008, police then carried out an extensive search of the Monnockney Woods in the Slieve Bloom Mountains after a small wooden cross bearing the name Fiona Pender was found on the border between Laois and Offaly. So somebody came across, it's so sinister, this cross saying Fiona Pender. And so police started searching the area. Then new information launched a second search in Laois in 2014, with the Irish Daily Star saying that the police were close to making an arrest after new information passed to them by police in another jurisdiction, but no trace of her has ever been found. Next, and very distressingly, the youngest of the group is Cara Breen, who is 17 from County Louth. She went missing on the 13th of February 1997 when she snuck out of her bedroom to meet someone. Ciara and her mum had tea together in a local cafe at about 6:45 on the 12th of February, and they'd gone home, they'd watched telly and gone to bed at about 12:25 in the morning, and Ciara had put a videotape in to record her favourite show. And her mum... so her mum says she got the tape ready. She wrote on the tape, "Circle of friends, Ciara Breen's tape, do not touch. Chris O'Donnell, I love you," and put it in the recorder to tape. So that's what I mean. That is not a 17-year-old who's about to run off and not tell her mum and disappear. She was very close to her mum. So her mum says now that was at 8 o'clock. Does that sound like a girl who's going to go out and not come back? And it doesn't. It's just those little things. So her mum gets up to go to the loo in the middle of the night and looks in on her daughter and sees that her daughter is not there and that her daughter's bedroom window is on the latch. So she thinks she must have snuck out the front door to meet someone and left the door on the latch so that she could climb back in. Her mum says, quote, "I sat in the armchair waiting for that leg to come through the window, but it never came." What's interesting about Ciara's disappearance was that she was wearing a limited edition Mickey Mouse Disney watch. It had a square face and it showed Mickey Mouse catching a ball, and it was a present from a friend who'd gone to Florida, and so it wasn't available in this country. So they knew that if they found that watch, they'd find her or where she'd been. In 2015, a man in his 50s was arrested in relation to Ciara's disappearance, but was later released without charge. Police, sub-aqua teams and forensic specialists searched an area called Barmer's Bog in Dundalk, Louth. It's 16 acres, it's huge, it's this area of bogland. 2 areas were searched thoroughly and nothing was found. But they did have a suspect. So Ciara disappears in 1997 and they make an arrest in 1999. And their suspect is a man called Liam Mullen. And he's arrested. They can't hold him. They don't have enough evidence. So he is released. He's arrested again in 2015 after police received 2 letters and took 2 statements from 2 people who came forward with fresh information. And these women said they'd had relationships with Mullen and they were afraid of him. And one said that Mullen told her he knew where Ciara was. But it's hearsay, they've got no proof, and he's released without charge. Now, he had always maintained his innocence and said he had no relationship with Ciara other to say hello to her in the street, though a witness had seen him walking along the canal side with her appearing to be quite drunk. And another witness said, a few witnesses actually were in the pub drinking with him, and they were playing the news on the TV in the pub. And Kiara's mother comes on making an emotional plea for news of her daughter on the news report. And when the segment was over, Liam is reported to have stood up and said that Kiara would not be coming back. Now, obviously, he could just be saying that as a pessimist. But these witnesses came forward to the police and said, that's not necessarily how they took it. Kiara's mother bumped into Mullen on the street and said from speaking to him, she knew that he'd done it and he would never be brought to justice. Now, Liam Mullen died of a suspected overdose in the Dundalk police station in 2017. He'd swallowed a bag of heroin, which then burst in his stomach. In 1998, Fiona Sinnott, 19-year-old Fiona Sinnott, goes missing. She had just broken up with the father of her 11-month-old daughter and was living in Ballyhit, County Wexford, about 10 miles away from her family home. Again, this is before everyone had mobile phones, so she was close to her family, but about a week would go by without any contact, and that would not be unusual. On Sunday, the 8th of February, Fiona had been with friends in Butler's, her local pub, and had left just after closing time to walk home to her rented flat. And this is the last time she's seen alive in public. Her ex walked her home and said that she had been complaining of pains in her arms and upper body, and she'd gone to bed, he'd slept on her sofa. I feel like it was quite an on-again, off-again relationship. And in the morning, before he was leaving, he said that he went to see Fiona. She was still in bed, and she said she still had pains and she was going to go to the doctor later. His mum was coming to pick him up, and I believe they offered to take her to the doctor, but she said that's fine, she was going to go later. And he left, and she has not been seen since. Now, nobody knows she's missing for a little while. Her family would always meet for coffee in Wexford town on a Friday. And so when Fiona didn't appear for 2 Fridays in a row, they grew concerned. Police checked the records. No doctor's appointment had been made for her. There was no sign of her hitching a lift into town or getting on a bus. They obviously checked with her ex. He was with his parents the whole time. And what's interesting about this case is Alan Bailey, who was the detective working the case, said that her home, when it was searched, when she was reported missing, they searched her home and there was no clothing found. He says, quote, "What was considered most remarkable was the complete absence of clothing and other personal items, indicating that a teenage girl and her 11-month-old daughter were living there. It was as if the house had lain vacant all the months Fiona had lived in it," which I think is worth mentioning. So a local farmer comes forward. He had seen some black bin bags that had been dumped on his land, which again wasn't unusual. But when the missing persons appeal went public, he came forward because he'd found these black bin bags and he'd set fire to them to get rid of them. And before he lit them, he checked for an address within the contents, I guess so that he would know who was fly tipping on his land. And he found correspondence and containers with the name Fiona Sinnott on them and the address on George's Street in Wexford town, which was a previous rental address of Fiona's. And the farmer thought nothing of it because the address didn't match the one on the missing persons appeal, so he didn't come forward that quickly, but eventually he did. They also discovered that she'd spent the Friday night of the 6th with the lorry driver in the back of his cab. He was tracked down and was very willing to speak to the police. He was able to prove that he had followed the route he was supposed to be on from Saturday the 8th onwards. I believe he then went to England, so they were able to completely trace where he was. So then someone comes forward saying that there is a man finding it very difficult to live with the role he had played in disposing of Fiona's body. This is all very vague. This person who was feeling very guilty wanted to tip off the police about the location of Fiona's body, but refused to do so, saying that he would be signing his own death warrant, so because only him and the murderer knew where the body was located, and so he wasn't going to do that. And this male died of a suspected drug overdose in 2001. Despite this, it wasn't until 2005 that Fiona's case is upgraded to a murder investigation. What's really sinister is, to mark Fiona's 10-year anniversary, a plaque was erected on the 12th of September 2008 in a graveyard near where she was last seen. Obviously, this is yet another family who don't have... I'm always very cynical about visiting graves, but they haven't been able to bury their child, their mother, their family member. They haven't got a grave to visit, and so they were going to unveil this plaque on the 13th of September at a special ceremony. But when the family arrived for the ceremony, they discover that the plaque has been stolen. So one of the police involved says, quote, "It's almost certainly the case from speaking with locals that this despicable act was carried out either by or at the request of her murderer." A second plaque was erected, and this too was stolen. Personally, I would recommend that the third plaque was set up with CCTV trained on it, because that would seem helpful. So despite both of these plaques being stolen and that also not being traced, that nothing has come of this. In 2018, her family said they knew who her murderer is, and after 20 years, quote, "they have nothing left to lose." But we still don't know. That name has not been made public. It could be who we're going to talk about later. The next woman to disappear was Deirdre Jacob. On the morning of the 28th of July 1998, Deirdre Jacob walked into Newbridge, County Kildare, from her home, a journey which took about 20 minutes. She's 18. She'd just completed her first year at St Mary's University, training to be a teacher. This is in Twickenham, near London. She had spoken to several people that afternoon at around 2:20 p.m. She went into the AIB bank and got a bank draft to send to her teacher training college. And then she went to the post office, posted the bank draft. This is the 90s. And visited her granny in her shop and sort of pootled around, as I would call it. And then headed home. She's on her summer holiday from uni, and she's having a nice time. So she starts walking back home. The last reported sighting of her is very close to her house on Barrettstown Road at about 3 p.m. In fact, some reports have said that witnesses saw her standing inside the gate to her house, which is just horrifying. When she doesn't arrive home, her family becomes worried and they call the police. Now, because she is considered, she's not a single mum. She hasn't got lots of boyfriends. She's training to be a teacher. The police are immediately interested and they start an immediate search, theorising that she's been kidnapped and murdered by someone not known to her. She's not got anything going on in her background, and so police embrace this case. In August 2018, when nothing is found of Deirdre, nothing is recovered, her case is reclassified to a murder investigation when they receive new information that leads them to believe that she was either murdered on the day she disappeared or within the days following. We don't know what this information is. Now, there's so much of a conflict here between completely understanding why some information has to remain classified. These are, in many cases, open cases, but also it just keeps stuff in the dark. These families must be really suffering. But what is sort of the icing on the cake for this is police are no longer looking for suspects in the Fiona Penner, Fiona Sinnott and Kiara Breen cases. They know who committed these crimes but can't prove it. So those cases are not solved officially, but they're not also being investigated officially. And those families just have to live with that. So that leaves Annie, Jojo and Deirdre, the three that are most closest together geographically, which is very interesting. And there is a suspect in this case who is still alive, still around. So I could tread carefully. And the reason we have a suspect is that in February 2000, a woman in Carlow opens her front door when she hears a knock. And as she opens the front door, she is powerfully punched in the face. Her nose is broken. Her shoes are then removed from her and she is bundled into the boot of a car. Now, she survives this attack, so she's able to later on say that she feels the terrain changing, so she knows that she's been driven quite far away from where she lives. The car is stopped and her attacker then proceeds to brutally rape her for quite a prolonged length of time. He then gets a plastic bag and places it over her head and rapes her again. And she is within minutes of death when two poachers just happen to come across this scene and sort of rush towards this poor woman and her attacker. She's bundled into the boot of the car, but he leaps into the car and drives off, and the boot's not shut. She tumbles out, and she's obviously in a complete state, and the poachers eventually take her to the police station. But what is incredible is that the poachers have recognised the man carrying out the attack, and the man carrying out the attack is Larry Murphy. Now, profilers have been involved in these three cases, the remaining missing women. And they have said that if the same man, which is another thing, if the same man is responsible for all of these cases, then this is going to be a white male, mid-30s, married with children and living locally. Larry Murphy ticks all of those boxes. He's a freelance carpenter and builder. He works in quarries and septic tanks. He knows the area really well because he's freelance. He is in charge of his own time. He lives very close. Well, he has a hut very close to where the rape took place. It was a very secluded place in the hills, in the mountains. He has a hut there. He has hunted in that area since he was a child. He knows the area incredibly well. And what's very interesting is the FBI agent, Kenneth Strange, who was involved in the Annie McCarrick case, says of this attack on the woman from Carlow that it has all the marks of a serial killer. The removal of the shoes, so that if she escapes, she will find it difficult to run, and also so that they're, less likely to come off, leave clues. They're taking, knowing where they're going to go, going up to the door, knowing that she's a lone woman on her own. This is not a first-time attack. Now, Murphy pleads guilty to 4 charges of rape and 1 of attempted murder, and he gets 15 years. He could have got life, but for some reason, he is given the incredibly lenient sentence of 15 years. He told his brother, "I flipped," but his brother says that doesn't explain what he did. That walking up to a woman's door and knocking on it, that's not "I flipped." That's planned and cunning, and it doesn't look like a first-time attack, and it's just very sinister. And the fact that he's only given 15 years is also distressing. But going back to Geraldine Neeland, what is so interesting is she reads about this attack and she thinks, the use of a plastic bag reminded her of a murder in the 80s. The murder of Angie Smith, whose remains were found in 1988 in an incredibly remote area, but a remote area near Johnny Fox's pub, which is also near where the Carlo woman was attacked. So Antoinette Green Smith, known as Angie, is a 27-year-old mother of 2. And she disappeared at 3 a.m. on the 12th of July 1987. She'd gone to see a David Bowie concert at Slane Castle. She got the bus back to Dublin at 11:30 and then went to a bar with a friend and a nightclub. They met 2 men. They left at about 2 a.m. The friend went home. Angie walked with the 2 men to the taxi, and the 2 men got in a cab, and then she carried on walking towards O'Connell Street Bridge. Now, a taxi driver subsequently gave an account of a woman fitting her description getting into his car with 2 men, and he then said that he dropped all 3 at the outskirts of Rathfarnham village, but that's all very vague. 9 months later, on the 3rd of April 1988, her decomposed remains were found in the Dublin Mountains by a young family on a walk in the Killicky Woods. She had been raped and strangled, and her head was covered in 2 plastic bags. Now, because of the length of time that her body had been buried, they couldn't determine the cause of death. The coroner thought that the bag may have been placed there post-mortem. The first bag was quite loose, and the second bag was knotted. No shoes are found. So she's got some clothing on her, but there are no shoes found at all. Larry Murphy would have been 22 when this attack took place, so police say that he is too young to have carried out this attack, but other people are doubtful. It seems unusual that this there would be so many similarities between 2 things so far apart. While in prison, Larry Murphy wouldn't really talk to anyone. He would talk to prison guards and people who worked there. He didn't really make any close friends. He refused therapy for all the things that he was in for. He didn't feel like he needed therapy. He didn't think that there was a problem with what he'd done. Maybe he'd convinced himself that he flipped out and it was just a one-off thing, but there was no, he didn't want therapy for anger. He didn't want any of that. But he did have a psychiatric evaluation when he went into prison, which I think is standard. And this evaluation deemed that he had a psychopathic personality and the aggressive, cunning and quick thinking that made it very likely that he would reoffend. He didn't see himself as having a problem. He didn't show any remorse or any feelings of remorse for what he'd done. And he was quite arrogant about the whole situation. We know that Larry Murphy was working in Newbridge the day that Deirdre went missing. And interestingly, we've got CCTV of Deirdre in the post office waiting to post the bank draft. So that's partly how we've been able to confirm that that's where she was. There's CCTV that shows a man that could be Murphy in the post office at nearly the same time as Deirdre. Some friends have seen the CCTV and positively identified him, and some have seen the CCTV and said it's absolutely not him. There are certain things, it's very interesting when you see it. He used to wear T-shirts that had slightly longer sleeves than a standard T-shirt, and the guy in the CCTV has that. But not only were phones not so good in the 90s, but CCTV wasn't as clear either. So again, it's speculation. Now, a witness also comes forward to say that he's overheard a conversation between two men where one man tells the other that he has enough information to put Larry Murphy behind bars for a very long time. Larry Murphy gets out of prison. He serves 10 years. 10 years for what we can assume would have ended in murder had the two poachers not happened upon him. And he gets out of prison. Now, he gets let out of prison. He gets in a taxi. He takes the taxi straight to the police station where he makes a report to complain about the press following him. He then gets back into the taxi, gets dropped into the centre of town. He strips off his jumper, puts it in a bin, and then disappears into the crowd. And that, the people lose him. He's known locally as the Beast of Belting Glass. The whole community are just horrified that he's going to be let out and he's going to be living there. I feel like his poor brother has to confirm that he will not be housing his brother when he's released. He's tormented. It's really awful. Now, in 2010, a prisoner doing time for murder told police that he and Murphy were drinking and taking E in their cells one night, and Murphy said, quote, I did that when they were talking about Deirdre. He said he was driving through Newbridge when he stopped to ask her directions and then physically dragged her into the front of his car. So the police, when they hear this, they want to speak to him about it, and they trace him to England where they question him. And eventually he says to one of them, "Do you have a body?" And the policeman says no. And he says, "Well, fuck off then." Which is interesting. Forensic scientist David Kenny says the attack on the woman who escaped was not Murphy's first attack, which is what retired FBI agent Kenneth Strange says. He says it clearly isn't his first attack, and it probably wasn't going to end with her release. You don't put a plastic bag around someone's face if you're planning on letting them go. Also, as far as we know, there was no effort made to hide his identity, and he took her to somewhere near where he lived. He is also very interesting when talking about the area where the disappearance of the three missing women happened, where their last sightings were. And he has identified an underground souterrain, a sort of storage cavern, 1,000 metres away from where this attack took place and near the cabin that Larry Murphy has. So in 2018, the case of Deirdre Jacobs is reclassified as murder because two more inmates come forward and say that Larry Murphy told them that he did it while he was inside. All the information they have is given to the Director of Public Prosecution, who sits on that information for 2 years and then decides that there is insufficient evidence to prosecute. Annie, very interestingly, Annie's best friend said that she knew from her conversations with Annie that she had some dealings with a man who'd been physically violent with her, and that this man was threatening her. And this friend had given this man's details to the police, and the police had not done anything with it as far as she could tell. We don't know if that man is Larry Murphy. But on the 24th of March 2023, the case of Annie becomes a murder investigation. And this is partly so that they can re-interview people involved in this case. But there are other cases too, which I'm just going to touch on. There's Patricia Doherty, 29-year-old prison officer at Mountjoy Prison. She had come home to Tala in Dublin just before 9 o'clock on the evening of the 23rd of December, and she'd gone out to get some Christmas stuff for her family and had not returned home, and no trace of her is found until the following June, when dry weather caused a peat bank to subside and her body was revealed. She'd been murdered and buried there. 39-year-old Eva Brennan of Rathgar, Dublin, went missing on the 25th of July 1993. She was last seen in Rathdown Park, was very close to her family. She just moved to an apartment that she'd actually chosen to be on the first floor to ensure that it was secure and safe. She was very careful, avoided putting herself at risk when she was out and about. And then one day she disappears. She goes to her parents' house and she leaves. She has a tiff with her parents on the 25th of July 1993. She gets annoyed, she leaves, and they don't hear from her. And they know that she went back to her flat because the jacket she'd been wearing to her parents' house was there. She'd gone out without her jacket. She just vanishes. Marie Kilmartin, 35-year-old of Laois, had worked at a local nursing home. She'd come home after a Christmas party. She'd been dropped home, and this was on the 16th of December 1993, and her friends had said they might see her at a party later, but they kind of knew that she wouldn't attend. She didn't really like going out after dark. She was mildly agoraphobic. She lived on a quiet estate. She knew her neighbours. She lived with one housemate. She'd had a daughter in her early 20s that had been adopted by family members. So she had a child, but she didn't live with this child. And the housemate reports her missing. And because she didn't really like going out in the dark and she had mild agoraphobia, the police did act quickly to look for Marie. They knew that she wouldn't be comfortable being away from home for this amount of time. They were unable to find anything unusual when they searched her house, but phone records showed that she'd been called on the landline, the house landline, which was an unlisted number. The call had lasted for about 2 minutes, and it was traced to a phone box near St Fintan's Hospital, and a witness came forward giving a description of a man who they'd seen in this phone box around this time. So they have this description of a man, but they don't get anywhere, and there's no progress on the case for 10 weeks. But in June 1994, a local prison officer finds a body in the area known as Pims Lane, about 16 kilometres from Marie's home. It's discovered in a bog drainage ditch. A cement block had been placed on top of the body in an effort to weigh it down, and then a home heater and pram had been placed across the entrance to the ditch so that it would act more as a shield so people wouldn't be able to see the body. Her coat is draped over her body, and that's how she's identified. And then further identification is made through jewellery and dental records. Now, this area is known as a dumping site, which meant police believe that whoever had done this was a local. In 2008, 3 people were taken into custody to be questioned, but they were then released. Imelda Keenan, 22, of County Laois, was living in Waterford City when she disappeared on the 3rd of January 1994. She'd left the apartment she shared with her fiancé, said she was going to the post office. She found that it was closed for the holidays. It was the 3rd of January she was out, so it was closed for Christmas holidays. She'd left her handbag, her glasses and everything, and she's never come back. She's disappeared. What's incredibly frustrating about this case, and it's still going on, is that over recent years, 3 experts with cadaver dogs have searched the area where the souterrain is, near where the Carlo woman was attacked, where Larry Murphy is known to have had a hut and known the area. And these cadaver dogs have, separate from each other, reacted to the same area where this souterrain is. So basically, imagine an underground tunnel or an underground brick. It's almost like an air raid shelter. It's just a cool underground storage facility that the police haven't searched, and for whatever reason won't search. That seems intriguing, that these cadaver dogs, who are trained to smell, without wanting to be graphic, decomposing human flesh, have reacted to the same spot, but the police won't search, to the extent that on the 6th of May this year, so last week, six forensic experts, including David Kenny, who is the forensic scientist who has identified that the attack on the Carlo woman was probably not Larry Murphy's first attack, but also has looked at this area where the attack took place and identified it as right in the centre of where the serial offender that could be linked with the other women that in the Vanishing Triangle would be, and has found the souterrain on the map. So these 6 experts have said that they will test the soil and they will search the area to see if it's worth, if there's any evidence of bodies, and they will do this work for free. And essentially, I guess what they're saying is, we need permission, but also we need a police presence there to verify what we find. And they have not had a response. They don't know why the souterrain has not been searched, and they don't know, why they have not been responded to. But I think they believe that is where they may find the bodies of Annie, Jojo and Deirdre, at least, if not more women who have disappeared. And that is the very confusing, slightly convoluted story of Ireland's Vanishing Triangle. It's deeply sinister. I really recommend watching the 6 Silent Killings documentary that I watched. It's a 2-parter. It's got a lot of interviews with Geraldine Neeland, who knows what she's reported on these for a long time. And I will I update you with any information as and when it happens. The more you get into this, the more distressing it is, and it's so distressing for the families involved, and highlights good journalism, I think, because you feel like Geraldine Neeland is so involved and dedicated to these women and this case. She genuinely wants to find out what happened rather than wanting to sensationalise the disappearance. And she felt like the police perhaps didn't respond to all of these women as they should have done. Her understanding of what's linked and the police's understanding of what's linked are slightly different. I don't think she links in, for example, Eva Brennan. She is very focused on now the remaining 3 from her list, but the whole thing is deeply distressing, and I really hope that souterrain is at least searched. I feel the families will then at least be able to know that they're not down there. I'd really love to hear from you. I had a lovely email from Faye. I'm going to actually ask Faye if I can tell her story because it's fascinating. So please email me if you have anything to say to me. Just email me, theMondayNightRevue@gmail.com. You can find a link below to all the merch. If you're on the Patreon, you have a discount code for that merch, so you can use that. You can find us on. You can find me on social media at The Monday Night Review. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. And until next time, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seat before you drive.